Welcome to ESPN FC Live. Mark Donaldson, Shaka, Hislop. And after the wonderful game between Liverpool and Bournemouth yesterday that finished 4-2, 6 goals, talking points aplenty. Shaka, we had Villa 0, Newcastle 0. For those of us that got up early on the East Coast on a Saturday morning. Yay, for those of us on the West Coast that got up even earlier.
Yeah, go back to bed.
Yeah.
Is my I wish someone had said that a couple hours ago. Listen, it's been a difficult summer for both clubs in terms of an inability to spend because of PSAR regulations for both. Newcastle, of course, still embroiled in this Alexander Isak, will he go? Won't he go? Whatever it is, saga with Liverpool. So you just wanted to see how both these teams would fare. And in the end, it well, 3 minutes in, it promised to be an exciting affair. Langer had a chance that brought a very good save out of Bizot, new goalkeeper between the sticks for Aston Villa. Newcastle had a couple other opportunities in the first half. Villa were better in the second, but truth be told, I'm saying that, and the game was not one that will be in anyone's highlight reel.
No, they will not be releasing either VHS tapes or Betamax tapes of that one in the club store. Now, you mentioned that chance after 3 minutes. I'm going to go through, and I don't normally do this, I'm going to go through the rest of the highlights. This will not take long. Low energy from Villa in the first half. No shots from Villa in the first half of a Premier League match for the first time since 2022. The game was summed up in the 59th minute when a pre-planned Newcastle free kick saw Cher and Byrne, teammates, collide with each other. 65th minute, Ezri Konsa shown a straight red for a foul on Anthony Gordon, who was clean through on goal. John McGinn, lovable, especially for Scotland, but goodness me, he's not a right midfielder. And then in the 90th minute, Anthony Gordon with Newcastle's first shot on target since the 16th minute. Apart from all that, why was it what it was when we expected so much better?
I'm not sure. I really am not. And as you go through the names, even in detailing those highlights, generous term, we both know. These are two very good footballing teams, two very good squads of players, two very good managers. But I'm not sure why there was the stalemate that we saw today. Last season, Aston Villa kicked off against another of my former teams in West Ham, and absolutely battered West Ham. They came out the traps flying. So I can't even offer or I don't want to offer, first game kind of hiccups and nerves about the two. As I say, I maybe Newcastle and again, kind of given what's been happening or not, as the case may be with Alexander Isak, maybe that's kind of affected the dressing room. But at this point, I'm just offering cheap excuses for what was a decidedly poor football game by who you would have thought are two very good footballing teams.
Yeah, look, going into this game, given everything you said about Newcastle, most people thought, well, Aston Villa are the favourites to win this one. I think Newcastle come out of this with far more credit. We'll get to Aston Villa and their lack of creativity shortly, but Elanga is going to prove a handful, as we saw for Forest, for Premier League defences. Look, their issue is a striker. We know that. What can they do if they don't sign a striker and Isak doesn't play? That was different from today because you've got Anthony Gordon kind of playing through the middle, Guimaraes, Joe Linton in behind. You've got Harvey Barnes, who was playing on the left-hand side today. Is this just moving chess pieces around until they can sign a striker or resolve their striking situation? Because they need creativity up there.
I pretty much think so. And what you saw today, and to your question, if Alexander Isak does not leave or refuses to play, and no other strikers brought in, I think you're going to see a lot of what you saw today. You may very well see Gordon continue through the middle. What you will see, and was clearly evidenced in today's game, is that Newcastle have real pace on the counter attack. We spoke about the chance 3 minutes in, for Elanga, for the Konsa red card. Gordon starts maybe half a yard behind Konsa and puts some daylight between him and Konsa by the time he gets to the ball. So you see the pace on display. And maybe that's Newcastle's answer if they are unable to find that focal point in a striker against teams like Villa, who are good footballing teams, who play a very high line, which I'll be honest, really surprised me given the fact of Newcastle's space, which I just spoke about, and you've got Konsa and Mings as the two centre backs. I was really surprised to see Aston Villa continue to defend with as high a line as they did against other teams who won't play as high, who will drop a little bit deeper and closer to their own box, their own goal, and won't afford Newcastle that space in behind. It then becomes a far more difficult ask in terms of finding space for the likes of Elanga and Gordon and Murphy and whoever else Eddie Howe decides to call on. So that for me is a big question here. One thing I will say though is you look at Newcastle's midfield, Guimaraes, Joelinton, Tonali, that continues. I think that's a very good midfield three.
It is.
And given maybe space, and maybe that's Villa's thinking, stifle the supply in what is a very good Premier League midfield three, and hope that kind of hope that negates the threat that Newcastle posed. But in doing so, I just thought Aston Villa defensively were outmatched in terms of pace and allowed Newcastle to play that counter-attacking game.
Yeah, we just didn't get the chances created for anybody who was playing that role to finish. Now, before we get on to the couple of key incidents in the game, a quick word about Aston Villa. Onana is just a giant as a defensive midfielder, 6'5" Belgian, alongside Kamara. There's a lot of protection there for whoever's at centre back that doesn't get sent off. But McGinn, where do we fit John McGinn in? He's the club captain, but Tielemans is pretty much one of the first picks. They're playing him a bit more advanced now. Daniel Malen came on. Guesson, the new signing, will probably play on the wide right-hand side opposite Morgan Rogers. Someone's going to miss out. Is that John McGinn?
Maybe. But the one thing that McGinn brings is a lot of energy.
Huge.
And especially on a day like today, where again, first game of the season, some teams just come out with the blocks flying, as Villa did last season, as I spoke about. This time around, they just seemed a little slower out of the blocks, and that's putting it as nicely as I possibly can. And there are times when you need that energy. You need somebody who fires up the crowd and gets the crowd to fire up the other 10 players around them. And McGinn may very well be that player. But similarly, it may be a case of horses for courses. McGinn may not be needed. That energy may not be needed against other teams. And you go for that bit of quality. The one thing again, and as praising as I was of Newcastle's midfield three, Unai Emery certainly has a stable of midfielders that he can call on that can do just about any job. And I know, kind of on the back of today's performance, on the back of what we saw for 90 minutes, if that's the only 90 minutes of football you've ever seen from Aston Villa, you'll be scratching your heads wondering why I'm saying that. But just given who this team have continued to show themselves to be, I have no doubt that is probably as bad a Villa performance as we'll see all season long. And at least you get a point out of it.
Yeah, look, whether it's Onana and Kamara as your holders, there might be games that you play a Tielemans in there or you play a McGinn in there, and you've got your Malen or your Guisson as well. It was just a lack of creativity today. And look, it's the first game of the season. We like to overanalyze things, but ultimately it's got little bearing, and the team is going to be very different, you would imagine, for both sides come the end of the season.
Without question, I think both teams improve from here on in. Sure. As I say, it's been an indifferent summer transfer window for both. Maybe once the transfer window closes and all speculation is now done, everybody knows who's going to be there, certainly at the very least for the next 4 or 5 months until January rolls around and we get to do this all over again. Maybe both of these teams settle in and find their respective rhythms. There could be any number of factors that have played into what we saw today. But rest assured, and again, if this is the first 90 minutes of football you've ever seen, you'll be wondering why I say this. But Newcastle and Aston Villa are two very good footballing teams that have options, and both managers have options up their sleeves. To your point, Mark.
I said we would discuss the two key incidents. I was kind of lying because there really only was one.
Yeah.
I apologise for that. I kind of thought there might be more, but there wasn't really. And it was the 65th minute. And you spoke about transition, Shaka, and how Newcastle, like Bournemouth yesterday, they're going to get goals because of the pace that they have. A lot of teams will do that against sides that play higher up the park.
Mm-hmm.
There was a really good angle from behind the goal of the through ball that was played to Anthony Gordon and the space that Villa allowed for the through ball to be played and the space that Gordon had to run into. There's no complaints. We're not denying that. I'm just thinking from a Newcastle perspective, that's going to work this season. From a Villa perspective, you've got to be better when you lose the ball in an advanced areas because that transition is going to kill you.
It really was. And I wonder how much of that had to do with, I thought Aston Villa were better in the second half, well, better than they were in the first half, and they were the better of the two teams in the second half. And they were creating opportunities. And they had Newcastle pinned back slightly and were dominating possession, certainly in that second half. And then all of a sudden it breaks down. Elanga picks the ball up. I think he might have still been in the Newcastle box when he first got the ball. If he wasn't in the box, he was only a couple of yards out of the box. And then plays this long through ball. And because Aston Villa was enjoying such good possession, they committed numbers forward. So one through ball took out the entire midfield, who'd kind of pressed higher up, and they themselves were 10 or 15 yards outside of the Newcastle box. In behind, as I mentioned, listen, Tyrone Mings is an outstanding defender. There's no question. But up against the likes of Elanga and Gordon, there's only ever going to be one winner in terms of pace there. So Konsa had to be the deepest just in case. But as I mentioned, you saw where Gordon started. You saw how quickly he ran by Konsa, and you recognize the mismatch in pace there as well. This between Elanga and Gordon, I would have thought Elanga was quicker. Yes, it was Gordon who just blew by Konsa, which again just questions starting positions of Aston Villa's centre backs up against that pace. And Elanga's credit, I think it was Elanga. I think it was an incredible ball forward. Gordon did wonderfully well. Again, to his credit, good striker play. Knew the contact was coming. Knew if he ran across Konsa, the onus would be on Konsa to avoid any kind of contact. He didn't. As a matter of fact, he made it a little worse by putting hands on shoulders. Now we could sit here and debate how firm was that? Did he really have a firm grasp of his shoulders? From the time Gordon is running at full pace and he's expecting contact, and you put an arm, let alone two, on the shoulders of Gordon, he's going down. The referee had no choice but to show a red card. But again, I think that comes down to Aston Villa overcommitting in midfield when they were enjoying possession. There just was not that safety net. And defensively, I just thought they got that all wrong up against the pace that Newcastle have at their disposal.
Dogso, apparently, is the initialism for denial of a goal-scoring opportunity. And it doesn't really matter if it's one hand, two hand, or the severity. It is, and it's clearly the correct decision. Finally, I think we've done well to get 14 and a half minutes from a goalless draw. So thank you, Shaka.
We got more highlights. We got more highlights in the game.
we did. Who finishes higher, Aston Villa or Newcastle this season?
My bias aside, or maybe my bias turned up to the max, I still think Newcastle do. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of dust that needs to settle between now and the end of the transfer window. If Isak goes, I think Newcastle find someone who becomes their focus, and they get the job done. Listen, I look at Villa. You look at the names on that team sheet, and you feel Villa are going to be, at the very least, very close to Newcastle. That's me being kind, but as I say, I'm nothing if I'm not biased, and I lean Newcastle.
But we're back later for Spurs against Burnley and Wolves against Man City. We're going to.
At least I've got no bias with those. I've got no bias with those four. So
you'll still fit Newcastle in, and I'll still fit Hearts somehow into our live hits later on ESPN FC. Good to have you back, Shaq, for a new season in the Premier League. You know what? As D. Ream once sang, things can only get better. It wasn't great. It's a point apiece. We'll see you again later. Bye.